Hi, I'm Steve Garrett, and I want to talk to you a little bit about a leadership lab called Patterns and Sequence. It's a very fun lab for the participants, and they will learn from it a few things, one of which is competition drives innovation. Another thing they'll learn is the importance of listening and, and the idea that all good ideas don't always come from the same people. Sometimes they come from somebody you didn't expect them from at all, and a little bit about group processes. This lab takes a staffing of one moderator for however many groups you've got, and you ought to have at least one facilitator for each group, though a facilitator can handle more than one group, but I would say one facilitator for every small group. And a small group for this would be somewhere between 8 and 16 individual participants. The materials that are needed is 3 balls for each group. And these balls ought to be less than 2 inches. I mean, if you can hold all 3 of them in your hand at one time, they would be perfect. But they have to be distinguishable from one another, either by color or number, or maybe even one football, one soccer ball, and one basketball. Timing on this is a half hour, maybe an hour, but it's pretty flexible. It actually doesn't take a long time, and the difference between 20 minutes and an hour is how much time you spend on debriefing and discussion. It starts by breaking the large group into smaller groups of 8 to 12, 14, 16 people. I've even had it where we've had groups of 20 people, but this is about the right size group. And they form a circle. Each facilitator is given a set of the 3 distinctly balls. And the facilitator is not a part of the group, they're outside of the group. One ball is given to one member of the group, the first person, and all the other members of the group raise their hand to identify that they had not yet touched the ball. Instruction is given to move the ball from one member of the group to the hand of another group until all participants have touched the ball. When the participants does touch the ball, they are to put their hand down, and the pattern has been established. That's the pattern part of pattern and sequence. Now, interestingly, sometimes they just pass the ball around the circle, but usually they toss it to somebody on the other side of the circle. It doesn't really matter. It's all going to work out either way. Then the pattern is repeated with the introduction of a second ball to establish the sequence. Following the 2 balls around the group, then we go to a third ball. So we now have a pattern that was the same each time, and a sequence of 1 ball, 2 balls, and then 3 balls. The facilitator is asked to time this experience. The lab leader then announces the time that each group achieved. And then it's time to tell the groups that another group, and it's always good to make it if it's Rotarians, maybe it was Kiwanians. If it's a group of boys, it was a group of girls. If it's a group of juniors in high school, it's a group of 8th graders. That another group was able to get the pattern and sequence in half that amount of time. And then the group is challenged to strategize how they're going to get their tasks done more quickly. Then the lab leader announces that they are going to do it for time once. This time, the goal is at least half as fast, or at least twice as fast. The lab leader then announces each group's times. Appropriate accolades are given. And then the group is told that there were groups who have done it much faster. At this point, you might want to cut the time in half again. Or maybe if your groups are small enough and their time was quick enough, just tell them that the goal is to do it in a second or less. 1 second or less. After they strategize for a while, most of them start to figure out that what you said was from hand to hand, pattern and sequence, And if they all put their hands in the middle and put them in sideways and put them right next to each other, and one person holds the balls in their hand and runs them across the top of the balls, it's very quick. Then you go into the debriefing questions. And the debriefing questions are, would you have guessed that you were going to be able to so one of the debriefing questions is, would you guess that most of the groups would make the same changes, but not at the same time? Would you have guessed that you were going to be able to accomplish this in the very beginning at such a high speed? Or did it take incremental improvement to get there? And isn't that the way most things are, where improvement is incremental? Did you think that more hands made it more difficult? And sometimes it's even kind of fun to put more people in one group than another. And they say, well, that's not fair. We got 12 people and they've only got 10. They can do it faster. But it turns out to be, it's not more hands that counts, it's more brains. And what was the result of telling you that other groups did it faster? Does competition drive innovation? Well, that's the pattern and sequence lab. I found it to always be a good, it's an activity that involves people. They're up, they're moving around, they're laughing, they're thinking, and they start cheating because they see what another group does and they say, well, that group did it. Maybe that's what we ought to do. And then it's like, well, no, you can't cheat. You can't copy us. Well, that's where we learn things, is by copying others who have found success. I'm Steve Garrett. Thank you for listening.